Everyone's dying to read Kill You Twice, the new thriller from Chelsea Cain, author of Heartsick. Pick up your copy today.
Hi, this is Bill Knauer of Author Magazine, and we're here at Elliott Bay Book Company in Seattle, Washington with Chelsea Cain, author of Kill You Twice. Chelsea, welcome to Author.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Chelsea, Kill You Twice is your fifth book in this series.
Yeah.
And I have interviewed many suspense writers, and particularly scary suspense writers, and like all of them, you're such a nice person. So
people always say that to me, and they
person,
always seem so disappointed. Like, oh, you seem so nice.
You
like
are
they
so
want
not
me to be
creepy.
eviler. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. So what is this marriage of your very sunny disposition with these rather dark tales that you like to tell?
I don't know. Like, I think maybe I am happy because I can get all that out on the page. You know, if I'm in terrible traffic and I am really angry at the guy in front of me, I can say to myself, I'm going to go home and kill someone. And I get to do that. And so I can let that go. I can let that rage go and go home and just kill someone fantastically and think of that guy. And it's a very nice stress release, I find.
Is it? Now, you were born in Bellingham, or you lived in Bellingham, Washington for a
I lived
time.
in Bellingham, right, and that's...
Do you know that Bellingham is the capital for serial killers in America?
Yes.
There's like a tavern up there where like 6 guys...
Yes.
What the hell is that all about?
Thank you, because I've been saying this for years. Like, when I was a kid in Bellingham, Washington, like, I mean, there was, Ted Bundy was nearby, there was the Green River Killer, there was one of the Hillside Stranglers, worked at the Fred Meyer in Bellingham. Like, it was crawling.
This guy who shot people down in Washington, D.C., the sniper.
Yeah, right.
Also.
I know. Yeah.
To what do you attribute this?
I don't know, but I think people who are surprised that I grew up to be a thriller writer, it's like, look where I grew up. Right as all of that was happening, I saw this episode of Larry King, and there was the Green River Killer, Gary Ridgway. Ridgway cut the deal that I have Gretchen Lowell cut in Heartsick, which is to avoid the death penalty. He agreed to tell them where more bodies were. And they had some video footage of this on Larry King, of one of the cops and Ridgway sitting across a table. And they were chatting and laughing, like buddies, like old friends. But underneath were just all these layers of manipulation and so much at stake. And I was so fascinated by that relationship, And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if the killer were a woman? Because, it takes this already really fraught, complicated relationship with all this history and then adds this sexual tension to it. And I immediately came up with Archie and Gretchen, and I started writing the next day.
So what did you learn writing Kill You Twice? What did you learn writing it that you're going to take to your next book?
I'll tell you exactly what I learned. There was a couple of months ago, I was reading, I think it was in the New Yorker, but there was a study that this scientist had done. He wanted to understand why we experience time as moving slowly in periods of crisis. The whole sort of like if you're in a car accident, time slows, because it doesn't. But people really are, feel like it does. And so he tied a bunch of grad students to bungee cords and pushed them off of a high place, and then went over the data. And what he came up with was so interesting and cool. Usually we cull details all the time, right? Because otherwise it would be overwhelming. So we notice what's important to us at that moment. And what you notice and what I notice, it's probably going to be different stuff, right? But when you're in a moment of crisis, you stop culling. You notice everything because you don't know what detail is going to save your life.
Interesting.
And so
that's why it slows down.
That's why it slows down. And in writing, if I have a character who's in crisis, right, who's being chased by a serial killer, right, there can be a sort of, so I can sometimes get concerned about like slowing the action down too much because it's like, well, would Archie really be noticing all this stuff with a killer running up behind him? There's this desire as a writer, it's got to be quick, it's action because it's happening fast. But in truth, the more I slow down, the more I unpack, the feel of the air and the night sky and the pine needles under his feet and, the sounds, all of that, the more I slow it down, the more tense that scene becomes.
So I'd like you to finish this sentence for me.
Okay.
If writing has taught me anything, it has taught me what?
How to be alone in a room for a long period of time.
Did you not really know how to do that before?
I think that, in fact, I have always loved it. And I think writing gives me an excuse to do it.
Gives you a focus for your attention.
Well, and I can get away with being in a room for 10 hours and not coming out and not picking up the phone and not interacting with people. And I love that. I love being alone in a room and living in my head and being able to tell a story to myself. My name is Chelsea Cain, and I am best known as a thriller writer, a writer of murder. I like to say I kill people for a living, and I also write comic books. One, I think of myself as a storyteller instead of a writer. Writing to me it's a blunt instrument to communicate a story, right? It is a tool that I've worked very hard to learn how to pick up and wield so that I can tell a story. So I grew up reading books and comics, but not with the idea that I would write them one day. It was more that I was always in a process of correcting them. So I did a lot of daydreaming about how I would have ended the story. I really loved the idea of pages turning. And by 7th grade, I had started writing novels. I had an IBM Selectric typewriter from my grandfather. And I wrote a novel, about a female PI in Bellingham, Washington. Again, I was in 7th grade. I had no idea how adults behaved. But she was solving crimes and taking names. Just because I wanted a way to take this story that I had in my head and make it an object in the world. The story I have in my head is pictures, right? It is a film. And so it's learning to write novels was a way to develop the skills that allowed me to take the film I was seeing in my head and translate it in a way that would somehow create an experience that was somewhat similar to what I was seeing, but only using words. And comics, right? I start with the same film, but it's a different toolbox, right, to figure out how to write a comic book script, which is I think people read comics and you think about it, what the writer must do, and I think it's natural to assume the writer is just writing the words on the comic book page, right, in the caption boxes and in the thought balloons and stuff. And in fact, a comic book script, 90% of the words are art direction. It is writing a panel by panel description of what we're supposed to see for the artist then to create. And that is very much a new way of communicating. And I really had to kind of learn how to describe what I was seeing in my head in a way that would be useful for the artist. One of the things that drew me to comics is that it is a collaborative experience. And writing a novel is really just about being alone in a room, for years at a time. And writing a comic, it's just more kinetic. It's a lot more collaborative and there's a lot more communication. And there is this amazing potential to elevate the story in ways that I could not have imagined alone in the room. And that's like, that is the best part, is when whether it is the artist or the colorist or the letterer, like anybody brings in an element that is not something I would have thought of, that makes it so much better. Like that's, that's the thrill. So with Mockingbird, right, that was a comic I did 8 issues of for Marvel, and it was about a female character written by a woman, and there were always people in the kind of fanboy community who were who felt defensive or alienated about that, the fact that this female character was being given real estate. They felt was like somehow pandering or whatever, and they were resistant to that. And there was definitely like people who just accused me of having a feminist agenda, which I was like, well, yes, I do, obviously. So the last issue, I put her in this t-shirt that said, "Ask me about my feminist agenda." And there was a lot of response to that, but I really think that most of the, I think the tipping point on the internet was when I left Twitter. It just felt like like it was all of these, I was getting all this feedback on Twitter, which is very much the kind of comics bulletin board, right? That's the kind of social networking platform of choice for comic book fans and creators. And I was being attacked in like pretty misogynistic terms that I felt like were really unreasonable, and by people who really did not want to engage in a conversation. And just as if I were walking down the street and a crazy person were screaming at me, like, that crazy person has the right to scream, but I don't have to stand there. I can keep walking. So I decided to keep walking, and it became this huge media story. Like, I had news crews on my porch. Yeah, I had people like from all over the world, these like, BBC, like, huge media companies trying to get in touch to talk about it. Again, because I think they saw it as a way to talk about something that was happening in the culture, that they felt like this could epitomize somehow. Art should be dangerous. It is when I feel nervous, when I'm sitting at my desk working and I feel nervous about the content. Those moments where I think like, I'm sure I will take this out later. And if you want to be an artist, you need to take that voice of reason and you need to strangle it and you need to bury it in the backyard.